7 people are dead. 117,000 homes are still sitting in the dark, and neither disaster is finished yet. This past weekend, the United States fought 2 completely separate water catastrophes at the exact same time, 4 T-thousand miles apart from each other, and most people only heard about one of them. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what happened in both places, exactly why it was this dangerous, and exactly why the people responsible for keeping Americans safe are still not done working. On to August 11th, 2026, a system of severe storms began spreading across the state of Indiana. What followed over the next 4 days was not just a flood. It was a record-shattering, infrastructure-breaking, historically significant deluge that redrew the map of what is physically possible in a Midwestern summer. The National Weather Service reported that some areas of Indiana received more than 11 inches of rain in a window of just a couple of days. The single highest total came out of Newcastle, Indiana, where the rain gauge recorded 11.43 inches. Greensburg took more than 7 inches. Those numbers alone are serious. But raw rainfall totals do not tell you the full story. The full story is about what happens when that rain falls on ground that is already completely saturated. Indiana had absorbed repeated rounds of heavy storms in the days leading up to August 11th. The soil was not just damp, it was full. There was nowhere left for the water to go. And this is the single most important physical idea in understanding what happened next. When ground is saturated, the percentage of every additional inch of rainfall that actually soaks into the soil collapses close to zero, and the percentage that runs off directly into the nearest river or stream climbs toward 100%. So, when those 11 inches fell on Indiana between August 11th and 13th, they did not behave like 11 inches of rain. They behaved like 11 inches of water poured directly into the river. Every single drop straight into the channel with nowhere else to go. The White River took all of it. Flooding concentrated along the main stem of the river, running from Hamilton County down into the northern suburbs of Indianapolis. Multiple river systems across the state went under flood, warning simultaneous. Otters swallowing entire streets in the Ravenswood neighborhood of Indianapolis, submerging cars up to their roofs, rising to the front doors of homes, while residents navigated their own neighborhoods in kayaks and rowboats. That is not a flood. That is an inland sea appearing overnight inside a major American city. And then the White River did something nobody alive had ever seen it do before. At the Anderson Gauge Station, the river crested on Friday at 24.93 feet. The previous all-time record at that station was 23.66 feet. That record had stood since 1913, 113 years, 2 world eras, the Great Depression, the interstate highway system being built, the moon landing, every flood that came through Indiana, and all that tumult. And none of them touched that number until Friday, August 14th, 2026. Friday's crest beat the 1913 record by 1.33 feet. Upstream at Noblesville, about 15 miles north of Indianapolis, the river also broke its own 1913 record, forecast to crest at 24.5 feet against an old record of 23.8. Here's what makes this genuinely extraordinary, not just as a headline number. The 1913 flood was not a summer event. It was a spring flood, driven by a combination of snowmelt and heavy rain. In late March of that year, a massive storm system dumped 6 to 11 inches of rain across Indiana, Ohio, parts of Pennsylvania, and Kentucky, on top of a snowpack that was already melting into ground, still partially frozen in places. That is an enormous hydrological load. Snow, melting into frozen ground that cannot absorb it, plus heavy rain stacked on top. That event killed an estimated 100 to 200 people in Indiana alone, left more than 250,000 people across the Midwest homeless, and became the second deadliest flood in United States history. It became the benchmark, the number against which every Indiana flood since has been measured. The August 2026 flood beat it with rainfall alone. No snowpack, no frozen ground, no spring melt already sitting in the channel before the rain started. August in Indiana is supposed to be the season when a river has the most capacity to absorb a shock. Warm ground, no snowmelt. Every hydrological advantage was stacked in favor of the 1913 record, and a summer thunderstorm sequence just walked past it anyway. That detail should stop you cold, because it means the infrastructure, the flood maps, the insurance rate calculations, the height of levees, the drainage system design, the location of roads that go underwater in a flood, all of it was built around a number from 1913. And on Friday, that number stopped being the ceiling. The meteorology behind this is not exotic. It is not a once-in-a-lifetime atmospheric setup. It is a stall. A frontal boundary set up across the Midwest and then stopped advancing. Hot, humid air pressed northward from the Gulf of Mexico, while cooler air held to the north of the boundary, and the two essentially balanced each other out, the front parked in place. At the same time, a high-pressure system sitting over the Gulf acted like a moisture conveyor belt, pumping warm, water-loaded air northward. RD straight into that stationary boundary, Every disturbance rolling along the jet stream fired a fresh round of thunderstorm cells along the front. Because those cells tracked perpendicular to the boundary, they crossed the same counties again and again and again. Meteorologists call this training. Storm cells running down the same track like cars on a train, each one dumping its full load of rain on exactly the same patch of ground the previous cell just soaked. A single thunderstorm crossing a county in 40 minutes leaves behind a manageable amount of water. The same storm regenerating over the same county for 2 straight days leaves behind a catastrophe. The intensity of any individual storm cell never has to be unusual for this to happen. Only the geometry has to be wrong, and the geometry is set entirely by whether the boundary is moving. The 1913 flood had the same failure mode, a storm system that stalled. 113 years apart, Indiana was hit by the exact same atmospheric mechanism. Now the people. At least 7 people have died in flooding and storms across Indiana as of the latest confirmed count. That number was 5 on Friday, 6 by Saturday, revised to 7 by Sunday. It should still be treated as a live figure. Among the victims was an 18-year-old incoming freshman at Purdue University. He and 3 friends entered a river on Wednesday when the flooding was beginning. His body was recovered 2 days later. A 4-year-old boy in Jennings County was killed when a tree crashed through the roof of his home during strong winds. A 58-year-old woman in Lake County, an 86-year-old woman in Porter County, a 32-year-old man in one county, a 31-year-old man in Henry County, 7 people, ordinary people in ordinary Indiana towns, killed by water and wind that nobody predicted would be this severe. The Indianapolis Fire Department alone pulled 95 people and 45 pets out of floodwaters by late Saturday afternoon. One city's fire department, one afternoon. Responders ran rescues and welfare checks across multiple counties. A senior mobile home community was fully evacuated. National Guard soldiers worked alongside local first responders in high water recovery operations in Indianapolis. Hamilton County officials reported historic flooding across the entire county. The Hamilton County Board of Commissioners president said Sunday morning that it was a good morning because it was not raining and the water was receding. That is the bar. Not raining and the water going down. That is what counts as a good morning after a week like this. The governor of Indiana declared a statewide disaster emergency and requested federal aid. An emergency declaration was approved, and FEMA confirmed federal disaster assistance was available. But here is a distinction that matters enormously. An emergency declaration and a major disaster declaration are not the same thing. An emergency declaration is the faster, smaller instrument. It frees up to $5 million in federal resources, and it is designed for immediate response, moving people, moving equipment, keeping the operation running while the water is still up. $5 million is a response budget. It is not a recovery budget, and it is certainly not a rebuilding budget for a river corridor that just set a 113-year crest record through the second largest metropolitan area in the state. The larger instrument is a major disaster declaration. That unlocks individual assistance for households whose homes were destroyed and public assistance for repairing infrastructure. Getting there requires joint preliminary damage assessments in all affected counties, and those assessments were still being completed as of Monday. Until those numbers come back, $5 million is what is on the table against a flood that just rewrote the historical record. The flooding threat did not stay in Indiana. By Sunday night and into Monday, heavy rains spread the problem eastward. Flooding hit communities in Ohio, with firefighters in one county alone making more than 50 water rescues over a single night. A woman was found stranded on top of her car in floodwaters. The threat extended into West Virginia and Kentucky. What started as an Indiana story became a regional one, a Midwest water crisis spreading east with the weather system. Now 4,000 miles west, a different disaster. Completely different cause. Exactly the same result. Hurricane Lala strengthened from a tropical storm into a Category 1 hurricane on Saturday, August 15, 2026, as it approached Hawaii's Big Island with maximum sustained winds of 75 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center used the phrase life-threatening conditions before the storm's closest, a P-approach. Lala never made an official landfall. Its eye passed the southern tip of the Big Island without crossing the coastline. A direct strike would have been Hawaii's first hurricane landfall in more than 30 years. It did not happen. There is no landfall point on the record. Lala officially grazed, not struck, and it still swept occupied homes completely off their foundations. Rain in the heaviest bands fell at rates of 3 to 5 inches per hour. Not per day. Per hour. One-day totals surpassed 2 feet of rain in some locations. The Big Island's mountains received more than 3.5 feet of rainfall, over 42 inches. Maui's mountainous area saw up to 2 feet, and forecasters said the maximum storm total forecast upward from 25 inches to a range of 30 to 35 inches as the storm slowed down over the islands. When a storm slows, the rain piles into the same location, The same physics that stalled the front over Indiana, the same principle of sustained rate over fixed location, played out in Hawaii in the form of a tropical cyclone that reduced its forward speed at exactly the wrong moment. Hawaii County's mayor said publicly that several occupied homes may have been swept off their foundations in specific low-lying areas, describing a river of water tearing through and washing away structures. Hawaii County Civil Defense. They launched a joint search and rescue operation using county resources, the Hawaii National Guard and the United States Coast Guard, to reach people who had called 911 for help but could not be reached because flooding and boulders blocked the roads. Search and rescue in the dark, in rushing water, with boulders across the roads, trying to reach people who had called for help and then gone silent because the cell towers went down. One person was killed in a storm-related vehicle crash on the Big Island. Over 100 homes were damaged or destroyed on Hawaii Island alone. 6 bridges were destroyed or nearly destroyed in one hard-hit area. Hawaii's Gov. RNUR described the scene in parts of the South as utter devastation. A section of a major highway collapsed overnight into Sunday, cutting off critical access to an area where one of the region's only hospitals is located. The collapse created a new waterfall where a road used to be. Airlines canceled dozens of flights, and around 190 total flights across the state were canceled or delayed on Saturday alone. All state offices, county offices, schools, courts, and judiciary offices were closed Monday. And the power situation is where the full weight of island geography becomes impossible to ignore. By Saturday night, over 88,000 electric customers were without power. By Sunday morning, that figure had climbed past 178,000. By Monday morning, approximately 117,000 customers remained in the dark across 3 islands, with roughly 41,000 on Hawaii Island alone. The utility warned that some outages may last months, not days, months. Here is why that word is not an exaggeration. Hawaii's islands are not grid interconnected. They are not connected to each other. They are not connected to any mainland network. When a storm hits the continental United States and takes out transmission lines, utilities call for mutual aid, and convoys of repair trucks arrive overnight from neighboring states. That system is how major continental outages get fixed in days. It does not exist for Hawaii. There is no road from the mainland. Every repair crew, every replacement pole, every transformer, every spool of transmission line either has to already be on the island or has to arrive by ship or by plane. The utility requested personnel from partner electric utilities on the mainland, and approximately 100 crew members were anticipated to arrive by Tuesday to begin work Wednesday. They had to be flown in. 2 of Hawaii Island's largest independent power producers were disconnected from the grid because of storm damage. Wind energy providers were also offline. A 42-mile span of transmission LNE along one coastal corridor required assessment after falling trees took down multiple poles and structures. That is not a scattered outage. That is a backbone failure. And on an island, a backbone failure does not get fixed by a utility 2 states over lending you their trucks. The second-order effects of an extended island power outage compound rapidly. An outage takes down water systems that depend on electric pumping. The local water supply department issued an essential needs-only notice, limiting water use to drinking, cooking, and persona. L. Hygiene. An extended outage takes down refrigeration for food. It takes down refrigeration for medication, including insulin and other drugs that cannot tolerate heat. It takes down the cell towers people use to call 911 when they are trapped, and the same towers emergency managers use to find them and coordinate rescues. Generators cover some of this for a while. Arrives by ship. None of this is unique to Hawaii in kind. It is only unique in degree because in Hawaii there is simply no road out. The governor estimated the storm caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage statewide, an estimate made while damage assessments by helicopter and drone were still underway. The real number will be higher. It always is. So what connects these 2 events, and what does it mean? These 2 disasters have nothing to do with each other meteorologically. There is no shared storm system, no common atmospheric front, no single weather pattern linking the Midwest to the Central Pacific. One is a stalled frontal boundary, the other is a tropical cyclone. They are completely separate, but they did their damage in exactly the same way. Neither one was primarily a wind story, both were water volume stories, and both broke through benchmarks that local infrastructure had been built around, in Indiana's case for more than a century. There's also a deeply important story here about how warning systems work, where they fail, and why accurate forecasts do not automatically produce safe outcomes. The National Weather Service in Indianapolis had upgraded the White River outlook from moderate to major flooding, used the words life-threatening before Lala's closest approach to Hawaii. The utility warned customers before the storm about possible extended outages. In both cases, the forecast was correct. The science worked, the warning was issued, and people still died, homes were still destroyed, and 100,000 people are still sitting in the dark. The gap between an accurate forecast and a safe outcome is not a forecasting problem. It is an infrastructure problem. It is a flood map problem. It is a problem of where people are allowed to build and on what terms. It is a problem of mobile home communities located in floodplains with no elevation margin and residents with no vehicle to evacuate. It is a problem of a Category 1 hurricane rating that measures sustained wind and tells you almost nothing useful about a rain rate of 5 inches per hour landing on steep volcanic slopes above a coastal town. It is a problem of a public that hears Category 1, decides it is survivable because it is the lowest rung on the scale, and treats that as a reasonable read right up until 5 inches of rain per hour start running down a mountain into their neighborhood. The Saffir-Simpson scale measures one thing: sustained wind. Category 1 is 74 to 95 miles per hour. That is what the number tells you. It told you almost nothing useful about the hazard that actually killed someone and destroyed houses in Hawaii, which was extraordinary rainfall on steep volcanic terrain In Indiana, a severe thunderstorm warning is one of the most routine alerts in the American Midwest. People who have lived there their whole lives have heard it hundreds of times. A stalled line of routine thunderstorms just took down the most famous flood record in the state's history. In both cases, the public-facing warning communicated something close to the inverse of the actual threat level. One more thing worth stating clearly: a 100-year flood does not mean a flood that happens once per century. That is a common and dangerous misunderstanding. It means a flood with a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. 2 of them can happen in consecutive years without anything being statistically wrong. But that 1% figure is calculated from the historical gauge record, and that calculation assumes the past is a valid sample of the future. Every floodplain map, every levee height, every culvert diameter, every flood insurance rate map in Indiana, and a large portion of local building codes sit downstream of that assumption. When a record that stood for 113 years falls to a mechanism that did not even set the original record, rainfall alone beating rainfall plus snowmelt, the assumption itself is what is being tested. Disaster declaration are underway, and that is the next concrete milestone to watch. Until they come back with a dollar figure, $5 million is the federal number on the table against a flood that just broke a 113-year record through the second largest metropolitan corridor in the state. The flooding threat has spread east. The system is not done moving. In Hawaii, 117,000 customers remain without power. Crews repaired 3 major transmission lines on Sunday, one of the first steps toward rebuilding the backbone of the grid. 100 mainland crew members are expected to arrive to begin work this week. Damage assessments by helicopter and drone continue. Over 100 homes damaged or destroyed. 6 bridges destroyed or nearly destroyed. A highway collapse continues to cut off access to a hospital. The governor's damage estimate is hundreds of millions of dollars, and that number will rise. Hawaii's last hurricane landfall was Hurricane Iniki on September 11, 1992, a Category 4 storm that struck Kauai, killed 7 people, and caused roughly $3.1 billion in damage. That was nearly 34 years ago. Most residents of the Big Island have never lived through a hurricane. Preparedness decays across a gap that long, and Lala tested it without even coming ashore. Both disasters are still unfolding. Both recovery timelines are measured in weeks, not days. Both events broke through numbers that were supposed to hold: the levees of assumption, the flood maps, the historical records, the category scales, and what people read into them. And in both places, the people who live there are now waking up to a world where the old numbers do not apply anymore, where the benchmark is gone, where what they built their lives around, the assumption of where the water would stop, turned out to be wrong. 7 dead in Indiana, 1 dead in Hawaii, 100,000 still without power, dozens of homes gone, an 18-year-old who should have been starting college in weeks, a 4-year-old who never got to grow up, a county commissioner for whom a good morning simply means it is not raining. Neither of these stories is over. The water is going down in Indiana, and the power is slowly coming back on in Hawaii. But the reckoning is just beginning. The damage assessments, the insurance fights, the questions about flood maps and building codes and what gets rebuilt where and on what terms. Those conversations will take you. Ours. The infrastructure decisions that follow this week's events will take decades, and the numbers that just got broken will either be written into the new maps, the new floodplains, the new design standards, or they will be ignored. And in 30 or 50 or 70 years, someone will stand in front of a camera and say another record just fell. A record that dated back to 2026, the year 2 disasters hit America at once.